Amen.
Oh come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Oh come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Oh, come now, days
you guys hear me? Is this no good? Kind of good? Yes? Cool. Do you guys like my blazing blazer? Right? Oh. Can you make this thing party up here? Chris, I think I messed it up. Wait. I did it. It's just not visible to everyone else. I did. I did it. Look at it. It looks right. Hold on, guys.
Presentation, a lot of presentations, unless there's difficulty.
Fair enough. Okay. Okay, sweet. Welcome to Super Soul Sunday. My name is Rachel. Okay, so I've got the topic of joy. This might not be sermon-ish, it might be more like lecture-ish. It's kind of just my style. You might fall asleep in the pews. It's okay if you do. Enjoy your slumber. I'm titling this thing, Withering Grass, Joy, and the Joy of Job and the Joy of Jesus. So we're going to take a really slow walk through Job because I need to explain like the misery of Job in order to explain the joy of Jesus. So it's going to lag at first, and then we're going to like hit this beautiful moment of comparison. There'll be one aha, and then that'll be it, pretty much, okay? So, withering grass. The main text is going to be Job 8, 1 through 19. It's a pretty big one. There's a very short phrase in there that's the apex. You'll know it when we get there, because I'll foot stomp on it. And in case you're wanting to follow along, the version will be the Message Bible. As with everything, whenever we talk about a text, we have to go through its context. All these things are important, even if you heard them before. I don't want to leave you blinded in any way. So we're going to start with the date. There's a lot of hoopla that goes on with Job. It's kind of a very curious book that's in the Bible. It's super ancient and archaic. It's one of a kind. We have problems dating it. The reason that we have problems dating it is because there's no historical references that we can reference that gives us a clue to when it was written. So let me throw you through some of the woes here. It's written in some strange Hebrew. It's not like any other Hebrew in the Bible. Generally, when you want to figure out when something's written, you look at the other texts in the Bible that you figured out when it's written, and you kind of compare notes. The problem is, it's the strangest Hebrew, and it's not like that anywhere else. To make matters worse, usually we also turn to outside text, outside literature, that we know when it's dated in order to help us find a reference to the date. The problem with this is, the Hebrew that it's written in is unlike anything that's available in the outside world either. It's one of a kind. It's standalone. We have no idea when it was written because of that. It's super archaic. It's influenced by Aramaic, but it's not Aramaic. So take it a step behind Aramaic. Who knows how old this is? We have no idea. Now, something else that we like to do is every book of the Bible views God differently. They have different beliefs about God, different beliefs about the afterlife, even who Jesus is and how all this stuff works. This kind of helps us date things. But the problem with this is, the way reward and punishment works, it's not found. Ideas of the afterlife and Job, he'll be handled in the afterlife and rewarded. That stuff's not available. The first time afterlife and rewards start being talked about is in the book of Daniel, which is dated 2nd BCE. So we know that it has to be pre-2nd BCE. There's no talk about the afterlife. The next problem is the idea of Satan. So, Hasatan's the way it's used. Satan, in the book of Job, is not used to reference some type of evil entity that's coming upon everybody. It's kind of seen in a positive light, and you'll see this later in the book of Job. The issue with this is that the idea of an evil force doesn't happen until Chronicles 4 BCE. It's more like that of Zechariah. The devil's kind of on your side. He is something that supports you finding truth. When we talk about Zechariah, we talk about the Second Temple period. But we have a problem with this. And that problem is the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were written in the Second Temple period also. The problem is the book of Job is written in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it has to be pre-Dead Sea Scrolls. We have no idea where to date this thing. Just like the date, the author is equally confusing. Who wrote it? Can't quite figure it out. The Talmud in section 14b says Moses did it. Moses. And then in 15a, it says that it was written 17 centuries after Moses. Can't be Moses. And then there's a lot of thought that says Job is allegory. So it's a very mysterious book. Can't quite put our finger on it. Could be said it's the oldest book in the Bible. The purpose that it's written, maybe theodicy. We're talking about a lot of bad things happening here. Why do bad things happen? Why does evil happen? Maybe it's wisdom. Is there some wisdom that it's trying to impart on us? Wisdom literature. Sometimes it just tells you how to live a good life and get by. Other times, it's absolute chaos. It's pessimistic. And now we party with Job. I forgot something. So as you can see, that's Job up there. He looks kind of miserable. And he's got good reason. So we can get to Job 8. We need to do a brief overview of what's happened to Job up till then. All right. So Job. It's a story about a very virtuous man. He's super wealthy. He lives somewhere in the east. We're not quite sure where exactly in the east. Hasatan, the idea of Satan. He comes about, and he's kind of tag-teaming with God. And he says to God, you know, this guy Job, he's got a great family, a ton of kids. These are all things that make somebody a good person back in the day. He's got because he's got a really good life. He's got all these good things going on. So how about you let me get down there and let me get rid of his wealth and destroy his children. And that's what happened. His children died. His wealth was destroyed. And interestingly enough, Job doesn't lose his piety. He kind of does that thing where he goes, God gives and takes away. Such a pious comment to give. So Hasatan goes back to God. And he's like, you know what? We haven't touched his health yet. Let me touch his health. He gets sores all over his body. So this picture of Job, this artistic depiction of him sitting in misery, and that's his wife behind him. As he's sitting there in misery, as Job goes, his wife says, why don't you just curse God and die? You're so miserable. Just curse God and die. Just end this now. But he continues in his piety. Insert Job's 3 friends. They catch word that all this has happened to him, and they trek from all these different places down to visit Job in his misery. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. So they get there, and for 7 days nobody says anything because he's just sitting in misery. Nothing can be said. They're just sitting in silence. So Eliphaz, they all have their thoughts about him. Job breaks his silence, and he doesn't curse God. He curses himself in the day he was born, kind of the equivalent of wishing God would kill you, except you wish this never even happened, you wish you never existed. Eliphaz speaks up at this point, now that he's broken his silence. And he says, you know what, Job? I have a solution for this. This is all happening because looking on him in his situation. His health, his family's gone, his wealth is gone. And these things have meaning to Eliphaz. He's assigned certain meanings to these circumstances. Where Job was up here, maybe, with flocks and family and wealth, and the world has equated those things to meaning. This is a good person. Good people have these things. And now he's looking at him with bad health, no family, no flock, no wealth. The meaning that is assigned by his friends to this situation is lowly. He's got lesser value now. The second friend, Bildad, he's no better. He looks to Job and he tells him, you know what? You could be righteous, but still this is happening for a reason. And you know what? Your kids probably screwed it all up. Your kids sin, and now you're paying for it, and that's how it goes. God doesn't screw up. So it's at this point where we find Bildad maybe he's the guy in the middle just because he's the second guy. I'm not sure. But Job's pretty buff in here too, by the way. It's a very interesting picture. Yeah. Bildad is where we pick up here. Bildad from Suha. Interesting fact here. So I tried to look up where Suha was, and nobody even knows. It's like mysterious, just like the author, just like the dates. Can't really put our finger on it, okay? But there's a theory around this. Perhaps Shuha comes from Abraham. He had a daughter, Keturah. Keturah had these 6 young gents born, one of them named Shuha. Shuha could be the name of the place where the person Shuha settled. And then people that sprung up around there became so-and-so Shuha. So, insert Bildad of Shuha. And here we go with our main segment of text here. Bildad from Shuha was next to speak. How can you keep on talking like this? You're talking nonsense, and noisy nonsense at that. Does God mess up? Does God Almighty ever get things backwards? It's plain that your children sinned against him. Otherwise, why would God have punished them? Moving on, 5 through 7. Here's what you must do, and don't put it off any longer. Get down on your knees before God Almighty. You're as innocent and upright as you say. It's not too late. He'll come running. He'll set everything right again. Reestablish your fortunes. Even though you're not much right now, you'll get up better than ever. There's this strange view that certain things mean certain things. There's measurements given by Bildad to his circumstance. Things are good again. But then he gets really smart, and he goes, you know what? Maybe I don't know everything. Put the question to our ancestors. Study what they learned from their ancestors. For we're newcomers at this, with a lot to learn, and not too long to learn it. So why not let the ancients teach you? Tell you what's what. Instruct you in what they knew from their experience. So he realizes maybe he doesn't know everything. We kind of get born, we live for a little tiny bit. It's hard to figure all these things out. So why don't we go back to see what the ancients have said, the people that have come before, not just one person, but like many, many experiences. And maybe we can put something together with this. And this is where things get beautiful. On accident, he says something like really wise, even though he doesn't apply it to himself. Can mighty pine trees grow tall without soil? Can luscious tomatoes flourish without water? Blossoming flowers look great before they're cut or picked, but without soil or water, they wither more quickly than grass. That's what happens to all who forget God. All their hopes come to nothing. Can mighty pine trees grow tall without soil? Can luscious tomatoes flourish without water? And then we've got flowers, and then they get cut, and then they change. So there's this idea that you shouldn't trust in appearances, because appearances, they change all the time. You should not try and find yourself in the appearance of something, because it's going to change. You can't be somewhere that you never were. That's what happens to all who forget God. All their hopes come to nothing. That kind of sounds scary, right? To all those who forget God. But what if it's not really you forgetting God? What if this is what happens to you when you forget your own identity? When you forget who you are? When you put your hope in the appearances of things around you? We have a tendency, like I said earlier, we apply meaning to everything around us. Certain jobs have different meanings than other jobs. The way you dress may have a different meaning than the way somebody else dresses. And if you try to align yourself to those things, they're going to change. You were never there to start with. You're not going to find yourself there. And all your hope that you had, your identity that you vested in these things, they fade away, and you're left without hope. You're miserable, kind of like Job. So what we do is if I tell you this little smiley face, this is you and me, like the real us, void of all the things that are around us in this world and the meaning that we've attached to them. If I tell you lawyer, what do you think of? Do you think of somebody who's really smart, who's maybe tenacious, Do you think of somebody who makes a fair amount of money? And those things mean something? And maybe you want to be a lawyer because you want to reflect those things onto you, and that becomes you, that's where you find yourself. Or what do you think of meaning to that job? Is it somebody that's stupid, that didn't really apply themselves, that doesn't really want to push themselves and go further? And so when someone has that job, you apply that identity to them? What about babies? Do you have a ton of kids? Because that means you're a helpful person, you're caring, you're nurturing. Does that provide you with value? What about education? Somebody that has like a bioengineering degree versus somebody that has a culinary degree. You think things with everything. You have given meaning to everything around you. God didn't give it meaning. You decided. Society decided. And you buy into it or you don't. You seek your identity in those things, and you label other people and you tell them who they are depending on all those things. It goes with income, money. When someone's mad at you, when you encounter an angry person, you associate meaning with that too. But that's not them. They're not in those things. That meaning you've made up, and it's meaningless. We see other instances of grass withering, plants withering, and other verses throughout the Bible. Some of those are 1 Peter 1:24 and Isaiah 40:8. All flesh is as grass, it withers and its flowers fall away, but the word of the Lord endures forever. If something comes and goes, the truth's not in it. Truth is something that sticks. It's not inside things that change all the time. James 1:11, for the sun rises with its heat and shrivels the grass, and the blossom falls, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So also the rich man fades in his ways. Don't trust in appearances. If you find your value and your identity, and you look to find others' value, identity, and appearances, you're going to be fooled. You're going to get confused, because they're going to always be changing. And anyone who does that, it's like hanging your whole life on a spider's web. The verse continues. They hang their life from one thin thread. They hitch their fate to a spider's web. One jiggle and the thread breaks. One jab and the web collapses. Sometimes we try to make our identity by deciding that maybe we want a certain amount of income. It could be anything. And you spend your whole life doing everything you can to achieve this because of how you think it reflects on you, how you think it makes you become. 16 through 18 says, or they're like weeds springing up in the sunshine, invading the garden, spreading everywhere, overtaking the flowers, getting a foothold even in the rocks. But when the gardener rips them out by the roots, the garden doesn't miss them one bit. It's like you spend your whole life working on this one thing, and if it gets plucked away, no one even notices because you missed the point. You were never really working on anything that mattered. You fooled yourself. 8:19. The sooner the godless are gone, the better. Then good plants can grow in their place. That's a scary saying, right? Godless, that creates the idea that some people have God, some people don't. Change that thought. You know the verses about chaff, wheat and chaff, and God comes down, grinds them up, and then chaff gets put in one area, and the wheat, the good stuff, gets put in the other? You have to view wheat and chaff, God and godless, as one thing. Wheat and chaff, they don't grow in separate areas. There's not like chaff roots that are growing. It's all from one stalk. These are like people. Some things you get correct, some things you don't, but it's all coming from you. There's no godless people and then people with God. So the sooner the godless are gone, it's more like saying the more you can become sensitive to yourself and assess yourself and look at the things and the places and be really honest that you've applied meaning to. And you do because you're trying to find yourself in that meaning and have that reflect your identity, the sooner we can move on to the stuff that really matters. You can figure that out and move on. And we can spend some time growing on truth, the things that stick, the things that matter. So how do we know that Job was misplacing his value when he was doing all these things? And this is why he's miserable. He kind of says it in his verses. Job 29, 1 through 7. He enjoyed being treated better than other people and took pride in his good deeds. He placed meaning in certain things that he did. These things make me who I am. When people treat me this way, this is who I am. 21 through 25, Job bragged about his previous status in his community. This reflected who he was. You hold a certain title. You hold a certain rank. Job 31 through 15, Job complains about his treatment by others that he labels as below him. The way he judges himself is the way he applies judgment to others. He buys into the idea that different things have different measures, and these measures create identities. If he thinks that about himself, he looks at everybody else and treats them the same way. And what does he get for it? A feeling of separation from God. He feels alone and depressed. His withered grass has got him hopeless. So if you found truth, it won't wither. It doesn't come and go. Truth will be your joy everlasting. If it does wither and you're without hope, it's not like a bad thing. God's not punishing you with like bad emotions or something like that. It's not trying to make you depressed. That's your guide. That's your cue to start assessing. Why do I feel this way? Did I apply meaning to this person? I was finding myself in this. What type of meaning was I attaching to this job? What type of meaning was I attaching to this family member? You search your heart for the self-worth that you've attached to things and people. Because joy fades when you assign your identity to something your identity isn't in. You deceive yourself. Deception, we also think of Satan, we think of sin, and then keep that thought. So sin and deception. There's this guy named Soren Kierkegaard. Super cool theologian guy. He's totally dead right now. His wisdom lives on. This is what he says about sin. Soren Kierkegaard uses very modern terms when he defines sin as building your identity on anything besides God. That definition is just another way to convey the old biblical themes of idolatry, self-justification, and self-glorification. If I head out into the world and I want to be a person that's seen as courageous, I want to be courageous, and I want to be smart, and I want to be all these things. Maybe I don't really want to be a firefighter, but I associate those things with that, and I go for it. I don't really want to do it, but that's what people that are courageous do. I'm self-glorifying myself. I'm justifying myself through those things. And in a way, that's idolatry. I'm worshiping all these things to find my identity other than just finding me. Tim Keller, Baptist guy, pretty nice for a Baptist church, okay? He goes on to say the fundamental motives of self-justification and self-glorification are what distort our lives and alienate us from God. When I do these things, when I find myself in all these things, and I attach all these meanings, and I let it reflect on me, my identity, I'm justifying myself, I'm glorifying myself, and I distort who I am, and in turn I distort who God is. And just like Job, I will feel alienated from God. Now we start to party with Jesus. So Jesus, he didn't find his identity into any of his friends. He didn't find his identity in his deeds or his job title. He didn't find it in his community status. Because he knew that who he was had nothing to do with any of that. And because he knew that, he was able to have people kill him on a cross and say, I forgive you. He was able to have an empire against him. In his community, some days people liked what he had to say. Other days they were trying to stone him and he was running for his life. But it didn't matter because he knew his identity didn't have anything to do with that, so he knew their identity doesn't have anything to do with their deeds, their actions, their job, or any of that either. His joy remained. And if we go back, just to make it worse, Jesus didn't enjoy being treated better than other people, and he didn't take pride in his deeds. He never bragged about anything. In fact, many of the time he said, I'm going to heal you, but don't tell anybody what I did here. He never complained about the way anyone treated him, good or bad. And he never labeled anybody lower than him. And compared to Job, when his grass withered, he didn't feel separate from God. In fact, he only said, I'm one with the Father. So we have some things that happen when you drop the measures and the meaning that you've given to things and people and relationships. When you know who you are, you begin to know who everyone else is. You become conscious that whenever you approach someone, it doesn't matter what job they have. It doesn't matter how they've ever treated you or how they're treating you currently. It doesn't matter their status in the community. It doesn't matter if they've been to jail. None of that matters. You understand that you're approaching holy ground. You see them for who they really are. And you're able to hold your judgments, and you're able to treat them according to their true identity. So here's the thing. Often I feel like people use the joy of Jesus as like a coping mechanism for when they don't have joy for themselves, to get them through like their misery. And I don't think that's how that's supposed to be. You're not supposed to think of Jesus just to get you by. You're supposed to gain the perception of Jesus. He came to show you something, a different way to live, a different way to be. You change your inside, you change your outside. If you want the joy of Jesus, you have to start seeing things and people in life like Jesus. So instead of you using Jesus as a coping mechanism, he came to shift your perspective so you can share in his joy, so you can have his joy. That's a hefty task. This is where you need to use your withered grass. You've got it, we've all got it. When your grass withers and you feel hopeless, and you feel anxious, and you feel stressed, and you feel all these things, you need to start looking inside yourself. And going, what meaning have I given to these things? Because I'm responding in this way. I feel so sad because maybe I feel like I'm a failure now. Because if I have this job, then it means this and this. If I have these friends, it means this and this. If I can afford this, it means this, this, and this. Because sometimes we express ourselves through things, and that's the good stuff. When you're free to roam anywhere and be curious about any job, any place, anything at all, it's you expressing yourself through all kinds of paths. That's great. What you don't want is to try and define yourself through paths, and you seek them out, trying to figure out who you are. So that's like self-analysis. But then we also can't forget that you can't judge people according to the measures and the meaning that we've given people in this world too. You have to pay attention to the measures you give others. Now what's interesting, I guarantee you, if you walk out of here and you go to like the store or something and you're sitting there and you look at somebody, if you stare at them and you go, what meaning have I given that dress that they're wearing? Some stuff's going to pop up. You have given meaning to everything. And like it or not, passively, you're judging all the time. But to pay attention to the meaning is to awaken you to this mode of observing yourself. And the nifty thing about observing is that's good enough. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to begin, right? So here's a really long quote I'm going to read. Self-observation brings man to the realization of the necessity of self-change. And in observing himself, a man notices that self-observation itself brings about certain changes in his inner processes. He begins to understand that self-observation is an instrument of self-change, a means of awakening. Use your withered grass. It is your instrument. And there's Jesus, and he's got so much joy that you should have also. All right? So there's just one quote, and this is like the last of it. How else can you find joy in a joyless place, except by realizing that you're not there? Cannot be anywhere God did not put you, and God created you as a part of him. That is both where you are in what you are. It is completely unalterable. And every time you try and find yourself and try and say other people are something that they're not, you're going to be miserable. You're going to feel hopeless and you'll feel alienated. So you have to use your withered grass. And that is the joy of Jesus. Drop the mic. Yeah. Should we pray or something like that? It's awkward church. All right, guys. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes. I'm serious. You guys are just looking at me. Okay. God, you're here. You've always been here. In order to know you, we need to know ourselves. In order to know I am, we need to know what I am not. Let us ditch these labels. Let us ditch the measures that we give to things and people and see the truth that is behind that. And this is how we can be in the world, but not of the world. Jesus' nature and in his joy, I pray. Amen.
Sorry, the music stopped since your Google Play Music account is being used on another device.